Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to tonight's program. We are excited to be back. I know we've been off for a couple of weeks, but we have made some great changes to this show. We have made some exciting changes to this show that you'll see tonight, and you'll see it in the upcoming weeks. And so we're going to talk a little bit about it tonight, and we're going to continue to unveil some of the exciting changes that we have for this program. Again, so please, if you're watching us, make sure that you let us know where you're watching from. So put that in the comment section. Let us know where you're watching from. Also, we'd like to make sure that you ask any questions that you have about tonight's program. But first thing we want to do is let us know where you're watching us from so we can give you and your city a shout out. So again, we've got some big changes. As you can see, we've got logo changes. We've got all kinds of changes here as part of the program. But what hasn't changed is the face of our program, and that is, of course, Dr. Michael Lenoir. How are you doing?
Thank you for that kind but brief introduction. I appreciate it. And we're back on the air, and what we decided to do was to gather our resources so that we could plan ahead. So what we have for you are subjects that we feel are timely for the Black community. We also feel that we have the world's greatest experts who have agreed to serve as our faculty. But what we really want to do is to stimulate enough conversation so that you get involved, and so that I hate to be on a program, Mr. Dean, where I don't learn anything. And so consequently, I'm hoping to learn from my audience what they're interested in, what questions Absolutely. They have, what contributions they want to make. We like for people to join us. That's our big issue. So thank you for joining us today. And so today we have a couple of really interesting subjects. First, we're going to talk about our new rebranding and with Ms. Monique Lenoir Pittman. And then we're going to talk with Dr. Ron Kennedy Bailey, the author of the book on gun violence. I think it's a very timely subject, and I hope that you have a lot to say and get involved in that discussion. So thank you for joining us, and we want you to join us every week. Next week, we'll be talking about taking charge of your health and taking charge of your health system. The following week, it's all about allergy. So thank you for joining us and staying with us, and we hope that you get a lot of information, and we really, really want you to join us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you want to introduce our first guest? I know she is kind of special for you.
Yeah, well,
before we get to that,
talk a little bit about
where we are with COVID.
We need to talk a little bit about the COVID virus, because I think that I've heard some very disturbing things this week from the CDC director. She's very concerned about the fact that so many new infections are starting to happen, and we're starting to turn around. The question is, did we open up too soon? I don't know whether I can actually say that. Obviously, there's a balance between health and the financial health of so many people. But it does seem like now the epidemic and the pandemic is more a problem in a different age group. The older age groups are getting increasingly vaccinated. I think up to date, almost 6 million people have been completely vaccinated. 11 million people have been partially vaccinated, but only 8% of African Americans. And that percentage has not changed over the last month. Now, we don't have enough time to discuss exactly why that's important from a number of different perspectives. But from one perspective, we're starting to see that whether or not you're vaccinated may have a lot to do with your lifestyle. And so consequently, I think if you don't have that card to say I'm vaccinated, it may keep you off an airplane, it may keep you out of a venue, it may keep watching your favorite team regardless of the sport, it may keep from music venues, it may keep you from some large gatherings. And so you still have to think about that. So that I think that we have to really be concerned about that. But I think you have a very interesting take on the issue of why that age group is having so much difficulty. What do you think, Mr. Dean?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think I don't want to be dismissive and think that the younger people aren't having more vaccine hesitancy. But I will say this is that when we started rolling out the vaccine, it was offered to senior citizens in nursing homes, and people that were older got first access. So they were part of the earlier groups that the vaccine was released to. And so to see the number supporting that is just really just exactly what was expected. More people over the age of 50, more people over the age of 65 are being vaccinated, and that's who was part of the first groups. What I'll be curious to see is now that many states are opening it up to younger people. I know in Georgia, they've opened it up to anybody over the age of 16 could be vaccinated. And so then I'd like to see how those numbers play out over the next few weeks to see if the younger generation are getting vaccinated.
Yeah, one final point, one call to action. Even if you're a young person who has chosen not to get vaccinated, and even if you're waiting for vaccinations, I think you ought to talk to your older relatives, those over 65, and have them get vaccinated, because they're at much greater risk than you are. Even though you may not philosophically believe in the vaccine, I do think that's been shown over the last few weeks to be relatively safe, if not almost completely safe. And so even though you choose not to get it, and that's certainly your choice, we respect that. Don't let it happen to your older relatives, because if they get it, the outcomes are very, very different. And so with that, we'd like to go to our first interview with Ms. Lenore Pittman. She is the executive director of the African American Wellness Project. And also, she grew up in my household, so I don't know where this health and fitness thing came from. Maybe it's because she saw me working out every morning, jogging, running, and then I probably set the example. So Ms. Pittman, welcome to our program. Before we start to talk about health and fitness, let's talk a little bit about the African American Wellness Project so people know why we do what we do.
Sure. So thanks, everyone. I have a slide deck. I don't know if you can share that, Ellis, and I don't go into everything in so much detail, but I'm the executive director of the African American Wellness Project. I work alongside my dad to really just make his mission come to life. The mission of the African American Wellness Project is to empower African Americans to improve health outcomes and promote wellness. As long as I can remember, my dad has been working out there in the community to make sure that we have that health disparities are addressed, and also to make sure that African Americans are able to take charge of their own health. So just wanted to share a little bit about what we've been doing lately as it relates to the African American Wellness Project. We all know that African Americans face higher health disparities and suffered from disproportionately. I hear a little bit of background noise. I don't know if you all hear it, but African Americans are 2 times more likely to have diabetes. They're 20 times more likely to have high blood pressure, and they're also 10 times uninsured versus 5.9 uninsureds for whites. So that makes the case for why the African American Wellness Project is so important. At AAWP, we serve to be a trusted resource in the community, and we do that, next slide, by having so many different tools and resources available for minorities. We have our website, AfricanAmericanWellnessProject.org. We also have digital tools, we do Facebook Lives and webinars similar to what we're doing right now for the African American community. Our overall mission is to improve the health of African Americans by serving as a trusted megaphone for information that enables and encourages African Americans to better navigate the healthcare system, advocate for themselves, and receive improved care regardless of insurance or circumstances. So our mission is very timely and relevant right now. Some of our goals are to reduce diversity. You guys can't hear the background noise, I can. Some of our goals are to reduce the disparity of care in the African American community by giving African Americans valuable information and tools. We also work to improve satisfaction levels among African Americans with regards to the care they're receiving. We enable productive conversations between African American patients and healthcare providers. And we also educate and empower African Americans to better advocate for themselves, that resulting in improved health. We have several strategic partnerships, actions, and initiatives. We've been working diligently, especially right now during the COVID pandemic, to partner with different organizations to get the word out about the importance of the vaccine and also about all of the conditions and the precautions around COVID. We do this through partnering with different organizations. We also distribute a variety of PSAs. Those PSAs can be found on our website at AfricanAmericanWellnessProject.org. We share tools and resources also via social media. And we provide a lot of programming, which you can also find on our website. We have the Black Doctor Speak podcast that was launched this summer. We also have African American Wellness Watch, which is the that we're doing today. And we have the PSA that I just mentioned, as well as shareable content and other digital tools that can be found on our website. So really, our mission is to partner with organizations in the African American community and otherwise to get the word out about health disparities and the importance of African Americans taking charge of their own health. Our media events are widespread. We know that we're primarily women, but we're also aiming to reach a larger population of African Americans. And we have had several events in the past several months, including we did a virtual house call with Dr. Lenore where he got on Zoom and he answered questions for people that just had relevant healthcare questions. We've also done a series of webinars on different healthcare issues, and we participated in a lot of virtual events. For example, we did an event with Think Local First TC, where Dr. Lenore educated employers on what to teach their employees and also their staff and their partners around what to know about going back to work in the face of COVID. And we also did a health fair with the Omegas, even though my dad's an Alpha, we did one with the Omegas, where he talked about different healthcare issues and conditions that affect the male population at a much higher rate. So we've done a lot of virtual events. We've created a lot of tools and resources. And we're also just working widespread to get the word out about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how people can partner with us. And you, again, can find out more information about what we're doing on our website at AfricanAmericanWellnessProject.org. I think there's one or two more slides. What can our partners do, and what can we do for our partners? We can develop and distribute PSAs on important health topics. We can also conduct health preparedness training for your employees. We can host content of speakers on our podcast, our Facebook Lives, our Zoom webinars, and any other platforms that our partners use. We can also help to prepare employees to go back to work and prepare employers to prepare their employees to go back to work. And we can help you access a really high caliber and cadre of Black doctors in our database. We also provide sponsors with exposure to our widespread growing audience, particularly in Northern California, where my dad is practicing, but we are also doing that nationwide. So again, we encourage anyone who's listening, who's interested in partnering with us, to reach out, but we also encourage those listening to tune in to the events like this and to our website to get more information about what we're doing and how they can gain from all the great things that we're doing to benefit the African American community as it relates to health disparities. I just talked about some of our digital tools that you can find online on our website. We also distribute a monthly newsletter. So if you are interested in receiving our newsletter that has a lot of different topics and information and related to health, then you can go onto our website and also sign on to receive our monthly newsletter. You can contact us here and also on our website. We really just encourage people to take advantage of all the great tools and resources we have to offer. I've been working as the executive director since, I guess, May or June, and we've really worked hard to update our website, to update our resources and our tools, to build our team, because we know that our mission is more timely than ever right now. So, I hope that everyone will reach out, go to our website, visit us on social media, and really just take advantage of all the things that we have to offer to benefit the African American community. I think that's it. Can't hear you, you're on mute. Still on mute.
All right, let's see, maybe I can. The host has unmuted me. And he knew that I was going to chime in too early. I see that all that home training that the stuff that I laid down seemed to come out pretty well. I like that presentation. I thought that was a lot of good information, but we're a serious organization, really committed to improving the health of African Americans by giving them the tools that you need to deal with the healthcare system. And health education is one of the most important tools. And we believe that this program is an important way for not only of us to talk to you, but for you to talk to us. And so I want you just to take a minute to tell the people what they're going to hear the next time when you come on to talk about health and wellness. because that was quite a presentation. So give us just a little bit of your philosophy, how you got interested in it, and some of the things that you think will be important when you come back as a guest on one of our next programs.
Sure. So I also work as a certified health and wellness coach, and I've been doing that for the past 2.5 years. I discovered health and wellness coaching by actually going through a health condition myself. I suffer from rheumatoid arthritis, which at times can be very debilitating. And at the point where I decided to take charge of my health, I was actually on crutches, unable to lift my arm, to comb my hair. I'm really unable to walk because I had waited so long to take care of this condition. So I decided that I wanted to get healthy. I lost 30 pounds on a health and wellness program that I did. And as a result of that, I felt so much better. I was able to get off my medications, and I decided to pay it forward by also health coaching others. So to date, I've coached about 150 people back to their goal weight and optimal health. And I really just share different tips on how to eat for your body, portion control, the benefits of drinking water. So many health tips that people know about, but they don't practice. And in my role as a health coach, I work with people to help them reach their goals, but also learn how to achieve healthy habits for life so that they know how to take charge of their health. And I really feel like my health and wellness coaching goes hand in hand with being the executive director of the African American Wellness Project, because the goal is, again, to promote health and to address health disparities, especially among the African American community. When I started health coaching through the program that I coached through, there was very few African American coaches. And my goal was to really address the population of people that.
Well, I mean, that's amazing. I didn't really know as much as we worked together behind the scenes. I didn't know all that about you, and so that's great information to have. And so, I guess the question I want to know is, what's it like working with your dad?
So working with my dad has been challenging, but also so rewarding. I want to mention that the reason that I actually got into really having an interest in health and wellness and communications is because of my dad. Growing up, me and my sisters, we lived in the hospital. So we were every Saturday with my dad making rounds. I always remember that. That's what we did on Saturdays. We went with my dad to make rounds. And so I was always, interested or in tune with, what my dad did for a living. But the older that I got, my dad probably remembers this, but I did a lot of his communications, like around all of his programs. He's always worked in the community. He's always had shows and, radio shows, TV shows around ethnic disparities. So I've really just worked with him throughout the years to help do that. And that's what really led me to my passion in communications and public relations. I attended Howard University undergrad, HBCU, but I received my master's degree from American University in public communications. And I wrote my thesis on how to develop an effective healthcare campaign for minorities, African Americans, because I really wanted to understand what it takes to have a healthcare campaign be effective for African Americans. And it's all because of my dad, because of growing up in the household with him, and because of all the things that he imparted on us growing up. One, serve your community, and two, be a blessing to others and pay it forward. And so that's what I feel like I've been able to do in my career as a health and wellness coach, and also as the ED of AAWP.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the time that you've taken. I appreciate. I know that I wasn't always held in this much favor by my daughters, but hey, I'll take what I can get. So we're going to take a break now and try to get. Thank you, Monique, for joining us, talking to us about a project that we hope people learn more about. In our second segment, we're going to talk with Dr. Ron Bailey. He is the author of Gun Violence, a Psychiatrist's View, and we want you to stay tuned. And we're just going to take a break take a minute for health, maybe the one on hypertension. Is that possible?
Yes, sir.
I'm Dr. Michael Norr with About Health Time. Today's topic, hypertension. Last week, the Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, reported that 59% of African Americans have uncontrolled high blood pressure. High blood pressure is often called the silent killer because it leads to heart attacks and strokes. So talk to your doctor about getting your blood pressure under control, and watch your diet, watch your weight, and exercise regularly. About Fountain Health Time is sponsored by the African American Wellness Project and Black Doctors Speak podcast. Yeah, I think we're going to have to improve the sound on that one. Were we able to get Dr. Bailey into our midst yet, Mr. D?
We don't have him as of yet. I just sent him the link again, so I'll be looking for him to join us here.
Did you get the link?
I think one of the things one of the things that we still had some people that were when we were talking about the vaccine is we really, there's still a lot of hesitation, and it's okay to have hesitation. I got my first shot yesterday. I'll be completely transparent. I got my first shot yesterday, and as many of these programs that I've done, as many of these programs that I have produced over the past several months about the vaccine, I felt very, very comfortable with knowing what's in it, that it's not going to be cause me any allergies or anything like that. I knew it was safe. I talked to many, many medical professionals about it. But still, as I was walking into the facility, I had some apprehension, and that's okay. I think ultimately, sometimes we overlook the apprehension that all of us have, even as medical professionals, as people that work closely with medical professionals, always on the periphery or in the middle of it, there is still always some apprehension. I have a phobia about needles. I don't like getting shot. I don't like getting blood drawn or anything like that. But I think what kept me focused and what made me continue to go through it is the care that I have. I want to be able to see my parents. I want to be able to see my in-laws. I want to be able to help society move back to some sort of normalcy. And so therefore, we have to kind of put our fears aside and walk through it. And so that's what I did. That's a decision I made. I'm not telling you what to do. We're just offering up the facts, and you can kind of make your own decision. But that's just been my experience with it. My arm is sore. my shoulder is sore where I got the shot, but I didn't take any medication, and I haven't felt any adverse effects. So I will give everybody an update once I get my second shot as to how it feels. But honestly, again, I'm not telling you to take it. I'm just saying that the reason I took it was because I've got parents and in-laws with that are immunocompromised, and I chose to want to protect them, and I got vaccinated for them and for my children.
Vaccination. Yeah, I sent you another text message so we can get the proper email address for Dr. Bailey, and so he's waiting for the link. So maybe that may be the problem, but we'll see right now. But let's talk a little bit about my experience. I was just as suspicious as most other people. I mean, doctors are really no different from you when they talk about when they get down to their own lives. They may tell you to do something, but they may do something completely different for themselves and their families when it comes time to making decisions. And so consequently, I thought about it quite a bit. I was very much concerned about how rapidly the vaccine was made. As an immunologist, I wasn't familiar with the process that was so quick, but it turns out that we've been working on these coronaviruses for a very long time. I was very concerned about the possibility that they hadn't done enough research. When we start to look at the number of people, obviously, that have been vaccinated, that's part of the research that we all have to be concerned about. So that was another piece of it. I was concerned for my allergy patients and whether or not they were going to be able to take this vaccine and use it and be able to do it safely without having an allergic response. And it turns out that the number of allergies is less than 1 to 5 per million. And so consequently, it's not very common that it is a problem. But on the other hand, I'm more worried now about the variants, that things are changing now so that these new viruses will be more lethal. They will be more effective. They will cause more disease, and they will cause more death. And so the race is between getting a kind of enough herd immunity and comparing that with the effectiveness of these vaccines and these variants. I'm concerned that if you aren't vaccinated, that when these variants continue to evolve, there's things are going to be much worse. But that's just information that you have to take into consideration when you decide whether or not you're going to get these vaccines. I think the more interesting piece is, what are you going to be able to do? What is your lifestyle going to look like when you don't have, when you're not vaccinated? I mean, where will you be able to go? You and I both know. You say, oh, well, they can't restrict my right to get on an airplane. They can't restrict my right to come into a theater. They can't. Yes, they can, and they will. You're already seeing certain colleges and universities saying that don't come back unless you're vaccinated. And that's just the first step. And I think that when you go back to work, there are going to be some jobs in some places where you're not going to be employed because you're not vaccinated. Now, that's no reason for you to change your philosophy. I mean, it's just a reality of the situation. And I wonder if we have a few comments or questions related to that while we still struggle to get Dr. Bailey onto the podcast.
Yeah, I think you raised an interesting point, and I had some discussion earlier about that, and really it's the nexus of public health versus private and kind of private rights, right? So it's really kind of an interesting mix that happens between the two. And so, yes, so what Dr. is referring to is what he's referring to is Rutgers University has announced that they, in the fall, that they are going to not, they're requiring students, if they're going to return to campus, to be vaccinated. We've already seen Qantas Airlines, that's the Australian Airlines, they are, it looks like they're going to be requiring their employees to be vaccinated in order to be on their planes. And so there are some things that people are concerned about in terms of, and companies are making decisions. That's not a government decision. That is a private business decision that says, hey, if you're going to frequent my business, if you're going to work for a company, that private company, that they have the ability to make that decision. And so it is, it's interesting debate. I don't know how I land on that, because I do think that people need to be able to make their own decision, and we're going to continue to present the facts, but they need to be able to make their own decisions. So I see a question here from Victoria. I'm going to put this on screen. How do we know if the vaccines are effective for the next year? That is a great question, and the answer is we don't. As with any vaccine, especially something this new, the efficacy has been determined, but we don't know how long you're going to be protected. And that is a genuine reason for concern. I'm going to be completely transparent. That's a genuine reason for concern. But the alternative to that is you're being exposed. And what Dr. Lenore was referring to with regards to the variants happen when the virus has the opportunity to continue to replicate. And viruses can only replicate in suitable hosts. And a suitable host is one that is an unvaccinated person. And so as the virus continues to replicate, it has a mutation. Most mutations are harmless and they go undetected, but a few mutations can connect to the body and take the virus in another direction. And that's what he's talking about. Because there's been so many billions of suitable hosts since the vaccine has been introduced to the world population, that's why these variants are popping up. The race is to try to get as many people vaccinated as possible to reduce the suitable hosts for the virus. And so therefore we can, by proxy, reduce the number of variants that could enter the population. Just to give you some historical context on that, the flu virus, the flu pandemic that happened earlier, the Spanish flu, what they called it in 1918. The reason why there's so many types of flus right now, we can't get a handle on it, is because they didn't have the technology that we had available. And so therefore that virus was able to replicate and have variants. And so we have to be really, really careful about being wary about the variants, but then we're not being vaccinated. If we're not vaccinated, coming in contact and contracting the virus allows our bodies to become what some doctors have referred to as virus factories, as it continues to replicate in our bodies. And so therefore, that's how more variants can come into play.
Variants are really accidents of nature. I mean, what happens is every time a virus replicates, it makes some mistakes. But sometimes when you make some of those mistakes can be more lethal to the human than the other regular virus. And so consequently, that's a mistake in the virus that allows it to move forward. I think one of the other discussions is, where did this virus originate? I mean, I think that the World Health Organization says it's from animal to human, but everything I hear suggests that perhaps they really did not get all the information that they needed from China. And so consequently, we really don't know whether, I mean, I think it's likely that it did occur from man to from animal to man, but we're really not sure. One thing I do know is that there are going to be more vaccines out there on the market. And so consequently, we're kind of hoping that at some point in time, we'll be able to have everybody vaccinated. And I'm thinking now that perhaps it's a situation where more and more people see the success rates of the vaccine without any major problems. And consequently, that probably should help us quite a bit. So now, better late than never, my friend Dr. Bailey.
Yes. We've got a quick video that we're going to play about tonight's topic, and we're going to play the video, and then after the video, we're going to bring in our guest, Dr. Ron Bailey. And as Dr. Lador said, better late than never. And this is going to be riveting.
This is like, this is like reality TV.
So we're going to play this video real quick, and then we'll bring on Dr. Ron Bailey.
Yet again tonight, familiar heartbreak and a gut-wrenching irony that the victims in Boulder managed to survive a global pandemic only to die in America's decades-long epidemic of gun violence. Only a week ago, it was Atlanta. Before that, there was Milwaukee and El Paso, Dayton, Virginia Beach, Thousand Oaks, Pittsburgh, Santa Fe, Parkland, Las Vegas, Orlando, Newtown, Aurora, Charleston, Virginia Tech. The list of places and names goes on and on. Since the Columbine massacre in 1999, there have been at least 114 mass shootings, 1,300 victims. Today, former President Obama wrote, "We should be able to live our lives without wondering if the next trip outside our home could be our last. We should, but in America, we can't." While hate and mental problems occur in every country, America is unique with more guns than there are people.
The effort has always been through American history to protect everyone's rights under the Constitution, but at the same time, we all have the right to public safety.
The country has suffered through so many mass murders, many Americans now feel a personal connection to one or even more. The same hometown, the same school, the same grocery store, the same bar or concert. Just as the country begins to emerge from the COVID darkness, the question many are asking tonight, is America's new normal just the old normal once again? Tom Costello, NBC News.
That's an interesting question to start, but let me introduce you. Dr. Bailey is one of the nation's most distinguished psychiatrists. He has been the chief of psychiatry at 2 major medical schools and is about to take on an even bigger task in New Orleans at LSU Tulane. As the chief of psychiatry, and the Dean of Diversity. He is an author of a number of timely books. Certainly this book on firearms violence from a psychiatrist's view, he wrote well before many people were as concerned as they are now about it. In addition, he's written a book on domestic violence, something he calls intimacy violence, and which we'll talk about at another time. And not only that, he is a man who is out and about, a Morehouse graduate. I mean, I don't hold that, obviously I hold that in high esteem. He's a member of a number of distinguished organizations, and he was the 113th president of the National Medical Association. So it's my pleasure to finally be able to introduce my good friend and colleague, Dr. Ron Kennedy Bailey, author the book At Gunpoint, Firearms Violence, from a Psychiatrist's Perspective. Dr. Bailey, you held your cool. I think it's your training in psychiatry, which was able to get us through this process of getting you.
Made it all work. Happy to be here.
Let's start out by answering the question that the video asked. Is this just the new normal, or is this the old normal revisited?
I think, unfortunately, it is becoming what some would disadvantageously describe as a new normal. This idea that, as President Obama stated, become more fearful of going to the grocery store than doing other things that you'd imagine would put you in some degree of direct fear. And I like the comment made, I think, in the prelim. It's one issue to protect individual rights, such as the person's right to bear arms. It's another to do so in a way that's so cavalier, as I think it happens in our country, that it puts public safety at grave risk. The reality is that when our forefathers made this Second Amendment, we didn't have weapons where you could shoot 100 bullets in 1 second. They had muskets, and they shoot one bullet in 100. It took 100 seconds to shoot one bullet. So the world has changed, and our government and our laws and our policies have changed. And that's, I think, what my book speaks to. There's so much to know about the process that leads to gun violence that puts Americans at risk unnecessarily. We must get the empirically based data out, have accurate information about what the gun violence concerns really are, and change policy in an effective way to be safer for Americans.
When we discussed this, and we've discussed it several times, there are basically three concepts around this process that you think drive the pathology. What are those three concepts?
Well, one clearly is the idea that there's just too much access. I think that until we get our hands on the access issue, as your prelim stated, there are more guns, 270 million, than people in America, and 340 or 50 million. It just makes very little sense. It's also true that persons who should have access to guns, which is the second point, can get guns. Our politicians speak regularly about the mentally ill. I'm a psychiatrist and what have you, but the data makes it very clear. The three groups who are most likely to harm you, somebody else, with a weapon, are those who have a past history of using weapons, violent history, those who've been victims of weapon-based violence, and those with a history of alcoholism or alcohol disorders. And in our society, not one state has a law banning any of those groups from access to weapons. So we spend all this time banning the mentally ill, which is a good thing to do, and banning persons in this setting or that setting on parole or what have you. But we don't recognize the persons who are most likely to cause harm. Policy should follow the empirically based data that scientists produce. When it doesn't do so, we again leave Americans at risk.
What's the second issue?
I think the second issue is that clearly there's been an emotional change in how we address internal feelings, I think, of conflict. We learn in psychiatry, to use the fancy terms, that internal conflict or suicide is violence turned inward. Historically, somebody would get a weapon, for example, or hang themselves or go out into the woods by themselves as they dealt with their own internal demons, if you will, to measure them, I think, in a very violent and impersonal way. Now, how often is somebody, one of my early articles I wrote on going postal. Somebody goes to a post office, hurts all the people who are there, then kills themselves. Our concept is that persons want to kill themselves in the end, but what has changed that makes us want to hurt 5 or 10 or 50 other persons before we actually end our life on our own? That's the piece that I think psychiatrists continue to try to understand, but it clearly does speak to, I think your part is right, there's a new normal and how we think about internal violence.
And the third point.
I think the third thing is we have to find some appetite for recovery-based treatment or care. Throughout my entire 30-year career, so much of the money that's been spent at the government level is on DOC, or Department of Correction, we institutionalize, we imprison, and we sanction people with harsher rules and longer terms in prison, and 3 strikes you're out and you're in prison. We've tripled our prison population just doing my professional career. Whereas when we look for money for Department of Mental Health and treatment and recovery and drug dependency issues and halfway homes, I'm a psychiatrist. When we discharge people in LA, often they go to homelessness. There's no place for them to go. So we create this permanent undercurrent of life. People have nowhere to live, nothing to do that I think very often is measurable. And if they on their own can't pull themselves up by their bootstraps and have a great life, then they're just kind of left to life's devices. And very often life can be treacherous in those circumstances. Those very often are people who are victims of violent crime, but the perpetuation of crime in a institutionalized fashion continues it. And I think that's what actually leads to this ongoing problem. Then it escalates until you have one of these really big issues. But your preliminary actually said it very clearly. We don't just have the 5 or 10 that get on national news. We've got thousands of shootings of 3 people or more in our country. Many you don't really hear about, because nowadays, if you shoot 3 or 4 people, if you're not just in that area, you don't know. You don't hear about it. It's a lot.
That's not enough to make the news. You got to do. And here's what I don't understand. And before I do that, we're talking with Dr. Ron Kennedy Bailey. He's the author of At Gunpoint: Firearms Violence from a Psychiatrist's Perspective. There seems to be something. I mean, obviously, a killing is a killing, and we have more than enough of those in the African American community. But it doesn't seem like when these mass killings occur, African Americans are involved. A guy with kind of like a Gatling gun in Las Vegas, this young man that shoots 8 people who are just going to pick up some milk at the grocery store. They don't seem, Black people don't seem to get involved in that kind of shooting. But shooting is shooting. What is the fundamental difference here?
Well, I think you really strike, I think, of a remarkably timely point. Clearly, most conflict or violence in American society is interpersonal, which means I know you, I'm mad at you, you did something that was an insult or a challenge to me or my personal integrity or my self-respect, you stepped on my foot, whatever the case may be, and that I want to harm you in a one-on-one type fashion. And unfortunately, we see a lot of that in some communities. There's a lot of discussion about crime within particular racial groups, Black on Black, white on white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever the case may be. But you're exactly right. I think that it's very clear to most Americans that when you see somebody go in and just shoot willy-nilly in non-interpersonal violence, when you're trying to hurt people who are just blank faces on the screen, you don't know who they are. They just are the enemy because they're in a grocery store at the wrong time or in a post office at the wrong time. As my earlier article stated, there are phases that get you to that point, but they actually disconnect you from that person's humanity. You don't really know if they're the same race or religion or gender or age or a hometown or school colors as you. You want to hurt as many people as possible before you actually hurt yourself. That's a very different emotional, psychological dynamic. And you're right, we've not got our hands around it very, very well, but it's definitely in some point due to how persons are acculturated, how we manage or treat the problems that they actually develop, and then their access to weapons of mass destruction, I'll call them, because if you really want to hurt a lot of people and you got a musket, you might be able to shoot one person. If you got a semi-automatic, you can shoot 500 and kill 50, as the guy did in Las Vegas some time ago. So the gun itself can be part of the problem, but the change in the psychology, I think you're right, is also a part of this new dynamic.
Yeah, I don't want to be distracted from this whole issue of gun violence in the African American community by one young man who shoots 8 people, and we talk about him forever and don't discuss the situation that we're living in our own communities. But before that, I'd like to ask Mr. Dina, we got some questions for Dr. Bailey that come from our audience.
Well, I have a quick question before we turn to the audience. Is that Dr. Bailey, what role do you think social media plays in the psychology of persons that might? Is it exacerbated because you get to see other people doing well, and if you're struggling with your life, and then you go on social media and you see people putting all these fancy pictures of them going on trips and things like that, and you're isolated now, especially in a pandemic, that could exacerbate the situation where your frustration, your anger, and then you in turn take that out on either whether it's individual, interpersonal violence, or in a sense where you just go into a grocery store, shopping mall, and shoot random people.
Well, I think it's well said, and I'd agree with the concepts fully. First, Does social media play a role in our psychology and our psychic so-called well-being? Use a fancy psych term. The answer is absolutely yes. The world is different now in 2021, where no matter if you're in a rural area by yourself or not, compared to 100 years ago, you can have access to not only 10 or 20 ideas a day, but thousands by accessing social media, television, radio, all forms of information from others. They could be across town or across the world. In addition, social media also very quickly can bring you the bad news, we think in psychiatry, as well as the good news. So we know not only who got married and who in our high school class, got a new job. We also know if there was a tsunami or a hurricane that killed 1,000 people, 2,000 miles away or half the world away. So there's an ongoing current drumbeat of negative information that some person's psychology, we think, just cannot handle. What do we describe that as? Psychiatry? We use the term defense mechanisms. They're as old as psychiatry can be, but we all use normative defense mechanisms to get past problematic actions or behavior. Many of us, including my good friend Dr. Lenore, are excellent at the use of humor to decipher circumstances. He's one of the wittiest persons I've ever known, but he can use it when he's being funny. He can also use it to decipher or to limit the anxiety in a tense situation. But people don't have humor or other forms of defense mechanisms to modify down the intensity. Very often left to its own devices, it ratchets up, worsens, at some point ends in some degree of violence. Again, you could have individual concerns regarding violence, but access to weapons that can hurt many people at one time is an additional component of this ongoing problem.
We do have a question here. This question is, what works for mitigating gun violence amongst youth ages 13 to 27?
Well, I'd say a few things. I think first, like any group, not having access to weapons is a start, but it's actually more for younger people. Most violence in our society occurs by males at the ages between 18 and 29, the so-called, primary risk factor age group. Those are time periods, and we said it in psychiatry, many young men are, all gasoline and no brakes. It's a metaphor, but there's a lot of truth to it. So we try to find ways to limit their access to conflict or problem. We do a lot of things, whether we get them involved in positive activities, go to church, go to school, play sports, have an evening job, but do something progressive and positive and not just have blank time on your hand. We also try to expose them to more positive so-called role models and less negative so-called role models. I mentioned earlier about our prison population tripling in so many years, probably actually more than that. One of the worst things about it is they said we make a worse criminal or a more violent person leaves jail or prison in our society now than when they entered because of the exposure. We don't really provide recovery or rehabilitation. We actually worsen the risk. Persons learn how to be more effective at hurting other persons. A third thing, though, I think that when we develop problems early in America, we don't put the adequate resources into play to limit the worsening risk factors and modify them. Many would argue, I like this phrase that, risk factors are not really, predictive factors because of protective factors. So the idea is that that second barrier of protective factors needs to be maximized. As a doctor, Lenore and I both know if you provide treatment, Lenore's an asthma specialist, there's got to be some treatment of asthma early that's more preventative or catches you at the early stages, what they call secondary prevention, and modifies the problem from getting so bad that it's tertiary. You go to the emergency room and get steroids. Same issue, I think, in psychiatry. We got to intervene early. When a kid is in school having difficulty, they need early professional intervention. When schools took psychologists out of schools or limited them, that was a bad thing. Often kids will say things to the psychologists in school that they won't say to the parents at home or to relatives at church on the weekend, and the problem is festering and growing in them that others don't really know about, and a professional could have made an intervention. There are other examples. That's probably one of the better ones that I think early intervention, when we see problems beginning, is best to prevent violence.
The stigma around seeking help have to contribute to these violent issues. I mean, many African-American males and many of my friends, and maybe even I, at times are a little bit hesitant to go into the mental health system because obviously, I mean, maybe admits to yourself that maybe you're a little unstable. How much does that whole issue of just not wanting to get into the system affect the issue of gun violence?
Well, I think it can also have an effect. The reality is the stigma in our circles has been great for a long period of time, an issue that I think all clinicians should really battle against, and especially in communities that are at highest risk. The fear of being viewed as being called these adverse terms like crazy or mentally ill makes most persons not get care that care would actually benefit them. I think stigma is also bad because it then pushes persons into another system. Many individuals who have difficulty, whether they're young and in school or a young adult as well, if they have behavioral difficulty, if you don't treat it clinically, it ends up being sanctioned in the legal system. So they get arrested for it, or they get maybe incarcerated or penalized for it. Washington D.C. the comment is that on any given day, over half of our African American men are under some form of conditional release, probation or parole, many for behaviors that were nonviolent, but things that people tend to do that now have been legally viewed as being illegal, and then you end up by taking a bad setting. So this stigma issue of being more comfortable being considered criminal versus mentally ill is a remarkably bad problem, because I think it pushes the laws and people into the criminal justice system away from a clinically treatment-oriented healthcare system, and also it makes many people not receive care. Psychiatry is the area of medicine where patients are most likely, if they get a prescription, never to get it filled the first time, which is, I think, data that we should be mindful of. We've got to find a way to connect with patients much better.
We have another question from our audience. What are some warning signs one might see in an individual that would indicate that there's potential, I'm going to finish that sentence, a potential for violence?
I think that there are four that we tend to look for particularly. One, first and foremost, when someone is isolated and withdrawn from everybody else outside the public sphere in a way that's different than what's normal for them. Some people are inherently shy, but if you know someone, you know if they're being more shy, so to speak, or isolated than they normally are, that's a red flag, especially for a young person, a teen or a young adult. We very often, I think, see ourselves from a mirror of insecurity or discontent. So the younger and less mature we are, we're more likely to think that small problems are larger and that others can see us like they can see looking through a mirror, so to speak. A second thing I think is that persons will often act out in ways that are highly volatile or with hot sauce on them, so to speak, we might call it, more so than normal for them. So when someone is yelling louder than usual, staying out longer than usual, drinking more than usual, getting into fights more than usual, conflicts and not physical fights, we should act on it and not just say he's having a bad day or blow it off as something inconsequential. Those can very often be early signs of a person who's at their limit. Their defense mechanisms have been overwhelmed. They're not at that point any more so able to manage the issue on their own, and they need very often at least local intervention by family and friends, if not professional intervention. A third thing I say is that we also notice some functional decline. When a child fails a class, when somebody gets arrested or the police bring them home, when there's some conflict that they're getting sanctioned. They used to go to church on Wednesday nights and they were told not to come back, or they're banned from the bowling alley on Tuesday nights because they're getting into too many conflicts. We shouldn't overlook that, which was that those very often are the early prodromal signs of conflicts that are likely to worsen. These things don't generally stop on their own. They're like snowballs going downhill, I've seen in my career. And very often one of the problems is that when a big problem happens, family will come and tell a doctor like me, well, we thought it was coming, but we thought it was a small thing, or it would straight out on its own. We saw some early signs that we didn't act. We were, hamstrung from acting. We push people to act early and decisively when their relatives are beginning to have these kind of behavioral and emotional problems.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm concerned about is that so much of our problems in our community are handled spiritually. And over the last year or so, we have many people have not had access to one of the stabilizing forces in their lives. Have you seen much evidence that the lack of spirituality, being able to kind of congregate and at least once a week within churches and synagogues and other things have had an impact on the mental health of our country?
Absolutely. Our data is very clear. I mean, there's more alcohol use, there's more arrest. Almost all of the negative indicators that are worse tend to be tied to a lack of being able to manage via some system that lets the air out of the balloon, so to speak. I mentioned earlier the term defense mechanisms. There's no greater defense mechanism than something that internalizes in you a ongoing strategy after you leave it to modify your behavior. church, maybe more so than just standing right next to your father who says you better do right or you're gonna be punished, or standing right next to the high school coach or the high school teacher or the policeman or the man at the store. Those issues may actually be temporary, short term. When they turn their head, you may go and do that bad thing. But it's something very often about how somebody internalizes church or religion or spirituality that should have a staying power and should stay with you. So even when you're away from the direct, third hand of good behavior, you will internalize the good actions, and that helps you avoid the temptations of conflict and violence, handling using violence to manage your problems. I absolutely would think that your point is well taken. The lack of being able to congregate once a week has hurt many, especially those persons who may be marginalized in this area of psychological and behavioral mismanagement.
Yeah, special guest Dr. Ron Kennedy Bailey, the book At Gunpoint, Firearms Violence from a Psychiatrist's Perspective. One final question in the time that we have. Have you seen communities that were able to effectively mitigate certain violence levels? And what kind of tactics, what kind of strategies can be implemented in our communities to reduce our own incidents of gun violence? One of the things that's lost in this tragic issue of how Asian Americans are being targeted, or African Americans are being targeted, is it's sometimes we're targeted by our own people and in our own communities. And while that's certainly not anything unique, I do wonder, what can we be doing? What could we be doing as doctors? What can we be doing as interested people to reduce the incidence of gun violence, no matter where it occurs?
Well, I think that there are a lot of things we could do. First and foremost, I think we clearly have to have education. We always start off with that as educated people. People need to hear this message, whether they hear it from me or you or your colleagues or others. It's not something that should be kept quiet until there's a conflict or a violent event and some people have lost a life or limb. So education and positive, repetitive, progressive messaging, I strongly support. We learn a lot from companies that sell things in the sales industry. They use billboards and how they use commercials, and they show you the same thing over and over again. By the time you watch the Super Bowl, you probably seen 14 Doritos commercials in every possible way, and you don't realize when you go to the store, when there's all kind of chips there, why did you reach for the Doritos? Because they positively message to you that's really what should happen. Our government and our society has the ability to do the exact same thing on positive messaging on how we handle non-violent ways to manage concerns of behavior. Similar right now to the anti-racist movement, it should be positively messaged in a repetitive way. In addition, I think the other things we can do, I mentioned a lot today, I thank you for the time, about getting people and intervening early. We generally know who's going to have trouble. I mean, some countries, they say they figure out who's going to have trouble early and they shift them away from education to more industrial type work. You can look at grades on schools because of behavior difficulty. And we should actually push more resources, more professionals, more support in that direction very early. Our society has really moved in the wrong direction. So in my 30-year career, if you're in the 3rd grade or the 5th grade or the 8th grade and you have trouble, very quickly there's an alternative school they send you to. Very quickly there's a policeman type person that was fighting you and grabbing you, and very little professional intervention, very little care and treatment, very little engagement with a counselor or a case manager or a therapist to get a chance to kind of talk about the issues, because clearly you're not at home talk about those issues in a way that allow you to get it off your chest and come to school with a clean process. So more we can say, I'll stop at those 2 points, but clearly there's a lot of intervention our young people need, and we can't leave it up to the devices of singular families. Very often I think the government, it may not be your best brother, but it can have some involvement that can be helpful, and we can support it in ways that are beneficial. Well, end by simply saying when businesses struggle, we say they're too big to fail. And the government comes to their defense and says, we got all kind of finances and we either raise taxes or create bills or what have you. We in psychiatry would like to see the government do that for people, for our people when they're in need.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Bailey. I'm sorry we're a little bit out of the blocks, but it certainly was worth the wait. I think the book, At Gunpoint, Firearms Violence from a Psychiatrist's Perspective, Dr. Ron Kennedy Bailey, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Interesting discussion, Mr. Dean. I mean, clearly guns in our society seem to be so entrenched that it just seems like an impossible problem to solve.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Bailey raises a really good point when he's talking about how we've become, we're numb to gun violence, and we get indoctrinated into guns very, very early, from water pistols as children to even thermometers that we take are shaped like guns, and so that transition from having a gun-like device in our hands to actually having a gun, and all of these video games as well, where you're using guns and weapons. I see even with my own son, he's plays a Call of Duty, and he's got all these sophisticated weaponry, and they're going through all these tactical things. It tends to blur the line between the reality and seriousness of an actual weapon and what can transpire when that weapon is actually discharged. And so I think we have to do a better job of recognizing that that we have to do a better job in recognizing that how we're doing and how we are kind of making our society more susceptible to gun violence by those practices early on in life, where it's not seen as such a bad thing.
I think the next time when we have this program on gun violence and violence in general, we're going to ask our audience for some solutions to the problem. So I'd like to thank Dr. Bailey. I'd like to thank Monique Goodman Lenore, to talk about the issue of the African American Wellness Project. We are committed, I think, over the next several months to bring you the very best programs we can. And so consequently, our program is only as good as your willingness to get invested in it. And so I want you to remember that this is sponsored by the African American Wellness Project through the good graces of blackdoctor.org. I want you to remember that health is your biggest asset. Next week, we'll be talking about putting together your healthcare system. We want you to remember the doctor who was in the COVID ICU, how she was treated. How many times are African Americans are treated in that way? Dr. Glenda Newell, Dr. Brenda Spriggs will be with us to talk about this from the perspective of their book, Focus on Your Health. Don't miss our program and tell your friends we're on the air.